Welcome to another episode of Workforce Workshop, the go-to podcast for unpacking the challenges and opportunities shaping today's workforce. I'm your host, Shiraz Kelly, and today we're tackling a subject that's at the center of heated political debates across the country, the minimum wage and its economic impact. Whether you're a business owner worried about rising labor costs or a worker hoping for a pay increase that keeps up with inflation, this debate affects us all. The push for a higher federal minimum wage has gained steam, especially as the cost of living continues to rise. But with that comes questions: will increasing the minimum wage lead to job losses? Can businesses, particularly small ones, survive the higher wage costs? And is raising the minimum wage really the answer to economic inequality? These questions aren't just political talking points, they have a real impact on our economy, our jobs, and our day-to-day lives. So today we're going to explore both sides of the debate and break down what these changes could mean for workers, businesses, and the economy as a whole. The case for increasing the minimum wage. Let's start by looking at the arguments in favor of raising the minimum wage. Advocates argue that the current federal minimum wage, which has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009, simply doesn't cut it anymore. In fact, they say it's one of the reasons many Americans are struggling with what we call wage stagnation. Now, what is wage stagnation? It's the idea that while costs of living like rent, healthcare, and groceries keep going up, wages for low and middle income workers haven't increased at the same pace. If you're a minimum wage worker in many states, you're earning the same amount you did over a decade ago, but it feels like your money is buying less and less. That's where the call for a $15 an hour minimum wage comes in. The goal is to lift millions of workers out of poverty, improve living standards, and stimulate consumer spending, which in turn could boost the economy. Raising the minimum wage could reduce reliance on government assistance programs, like food stamps or housing subsidies, since more people would theoretically earn a livable wage. Proponents also argue that a higher minimum wage could help close the wage gap, particularly for women and people of color, who are disproportionately represented in lower wage jobs. So from a social justice standpoint, increasing the minimum wage seems like a clear win. But as you might expect, it's not that simple. The concerns of opponents a closer look. While the benefits of raising the minimum wage seem clear, there's another side of the story, the side of small business owners, economists, and policymakers who argue that increasing the minimum wage could do more harm than good. One of the biggest concerns is that raising the minimum wage could lead to job losses. When wages rise, businesses, especially small ones with tighter profit margins, may not be able to afford the higher payroll costs. They might respond by cutting hours, laying off workers, or even automating certain jobs to reduce labor costs. We've already seen fast food chains invest in ordering kiosks and automation technology as labor costs rise. For some industries, particularly those that rely heavily on entry-level or low-wage workers, a sharp increase in wages could push them into a financial corner. Let's take the restaurant industry as an example. A restaurant that operates on thin margins might not survive if forced to suddenly pay workers significantly more. That could mean fewer jobs overall, which would disproportionately hurt the very workers the policy is intended to help. Another concern is inflation. Some economists worry that raising the minimum wage could drive up prices for goods and services. Businesses facing higher wage costs might increase prices to maintain profitability. This would ultimately put more financial pressure on consumers, who would see their purchasing power shrink as prices rise. So even though workers might be making more, they'd also be spending more, essentially canceling out the wage increase. And then there's the question of regional differences. While a $15 minimum wage might make sense in expensive urban areas like New York City or San Francisco, it may not be practical for smaller towns or rural areas, where the cost of living is much lower. Critics argue that a one-size-fits-all approach to the minimum wage doesn't account for the diverse economic conditions across the country. So the question becomes, is raising the minimum wage a solution to economic inequality, or does it risk doing more harm than good? The economic impact of minimum wage increases what history tells us. To understand the potential impact of raising the minimum wage, it helps to look at what has happened in states and cities where wages have already been increased. Take Seattle, for instance, which implemented a phased increase to a $15 minimum wage starting in 2015. Early studies found mixed results. On the one hand, many workers saw an increase in their paychecks. but some businesses responded by reducing hours or relying more on part-time workers. Still, other studies show that the overall economic impact wasn't as severe as some had predicted. San Francisco also increased its minimum wage to $15 an hour, and while some small businesses struggled, the overall employment numbers remained steady. Economists suggest that larger businesses were able to absorb the higher wage costs better than small businesses, pointing to a possible divide in how wage hikes affect different types of employers. We also have to consider productivity. Some studies suggest that when workers are paid more, they're more productive and stay with companies longer, reducing turnover and training costs. This is an argument that supporters often make. Higher wages don't just benefit workers, they can benefit businesses too, by improving morale and increasing employee retention. But not all economists agree. A 2019 Congressional Budget Office report on the effects of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 projected that up to 1.3 million workers could lose their jobs. While the report acknowledged that millions of workers would see pay increases, it raised concerns about the potential for job loss, particularly in sectors like retail and hospitality. The political battleground: what's driving the debate? Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Why has the minimum wage become such a politically charged issue? Part of the answer lies in the growing economic inequality in America. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of discussion about the K-shaped recovery, where wealthier individuals and large corporations have bounced back quickly, while lower-income workers are still struggling to regain their footing. The pandemic has exposed just how vulnerable many low-wage workers are, and this has added fuel to the fight for higher wages. On one side of the debate, you have progressives who argue that raising the minimum wage is not just a matter of economic policy but of basic fairness. For them, the idea of someone working full-time yet living in poverty is unacceptable. The rallying cry for a $15 minimum wage has become a key issue for many progressive politicians and activists. On the other side, more conservative lawmakers and business leaders caution against moving too fast, arguing that drastic wage increases could hurt businesses, particularly small ones, and lead to unintended economic consequences like higher unemployment. And then there are those who advocate for a more regional approach, where states or cities are allowed to set their own minimum wage levels based on their local economies. Some states have already taken the initiative to raise wages beyond the federal minimum, while others have chosen to keep it lower, reflecting the political and economic diversity across the U.S. What does the future hold? So where does this leave us? The minimum wage debate isn't going away anytime soon, especially as we head into the 2024 elections. Both political parties have staked out strong positions, and it's clear that this issue will continue to shape the economic landscape for years to come. As we wrap up, it's important to remember that this debate has real-world consequences for both workers and businesses. For workers, a higher minimum wage could mean the difference between just getting by and being able to cover basic living expenses. For businesses, it could mean grappling with higher costs and difficult decisions about hiring and pricing. The key takeaway here is that the minimum wage is about more than just numbers. It's about balancing economic growth, worker well-being, and business sustainability. And as with most political debates, there are no easy answers. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Workforce Workshop. I hope today's discussion has helped you better understand the complexities behind the minimum wage debate and its potential economic impact. As always, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes, where we'll continue to explore the issues that matter most to workers and employers alike. Until next time, I'm Chiraz Kelly. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead of the curve.